Hello again, Jamie Edwards from jamieedwards.com, and today I'd like to talk to you about Scrum versus Kanban and which process might work better for your project. Specifically, I want to talk about using either of these to achieve lean software development, which we talked about in the first video of this channel. So let me go back a little bit and talk kind of about my history of software development and when I've used these two processes on projects. So when I got started, this was in about 1996, 97, there was no Agile manifesto and projects were still waterfall. So projects I worked on at that point, we still did all the work up front to design the software before we started building it. And I won't bore you with another video about why Agile methods are superior to waterfall, Scrum and Kanban. I'll link below the video to a resource you can watch to get kind of the background of what is Scrum, what is Kanban. What I really want to talk about today is how to use either of those processes with a lean mindset to actually be able to adapt to what your customers tell you they want to change about the product as you're releasing it. So if you've been on a Scrum team before, there's a variety of different arguments people have as far as what is in Scrum, what's out of Scrum. For the purposes of this conversation, I'd like to just think of when we talk about Scrum, we're talking about teams that do work in sprints. So a sprint, obviously, again, if you watch those videos, you'll know all the details, or if you've done this before, you will. But a sprint is essentially a short, fixed period of time during which the team will try to complete some work. So why do teams do sprints? Well, there's a couple of reasons, but the business tends to think if we do sprints, we're going to get something quicker. And that is certainly one of the goals, is to try to rein in, hey, let's not develop a product for a year before releasing it. Let's do something for 2 weeks or a month. The sprint length is variable, right? One team, it might make sense for that sprint length to be a month. One, it might be a week. I'm not going to get into a religious debate over the ideal sprint length of time. That's kind of nonsensical. But the important thing is, to me, one of the things I observed, again, doing this for about 20 years since, that shift in the early 2000s when the Agile Manifesto came out and people started doing Agile. I certainly did around 2002, 2003, really heavily started doing it. The biggest benefit I find from doing sprints is, if you think about a waterfall project that might take you a year to complete, if all the requirements are done at the beginning, and I don't care if you're using user stories or epics or, whatever format you're using for recording what the software needs to do. In my experience, when you only take one pass at the requirements, before starting work and then just get started, in the middle of the project, let's say you're going for a year and it's a waterfall project, you're going to find that there were serious holes in the requirements where people didn't think of certain aspects. An example might be if a lot of your application is a typical CRUD app, right? Create, read, update, and delete actions, which most websites or mobile apps are these days. One of the things the team might run into is, oh shoot, if we have 2 users editing, let's say, the same record at the same time, we didn't think about, we need to also have a requirement that says, if a user goes to edit something that's already being edited by someone else, we need to lock them out or, come up with some conflict or concurrency approach. And if you think about how a team is usually under a lot of pressure when they're delivering the product, it's oftentimes that the developers sort of realize this, and through some informal conversations, people say, yeah, let's make sure we deal with concurrency going forward, but it's never actually documented in the requirements, or it's done for a little bit and then people forget about it. The main thing I'm trying to get you to appreciate is one of the benefits of Scrum is that it helps a team get incrementally better at process rigor. What do I mean by that? Well, if you think of to deliver a software product, you need to actually figure out the requirements that the user has or that the business has that they think the user wants. You need to decide what are all the error handling cases where we need to show errors to users. You need to have validation. So if the phone number field is wrong, do this. If this value doesn't match this, do this. You need to also have a strategy to handle errors. Oh, and just real quick, there's still construction going on in my neighborhood, so hopefully you can still hear me okay on top of all of it. There's also testing, right? Testing needs to happen every sprint or every release of the software. There's also infrastructure changes. So there may be servers that need to be stood up. There may be virtual machines that need to be configured. There might be specific versions of .NET or Ruby or Node that need to be on those servers for your product to run. And there also may be user interface assets, things like certain styles, certain buttons and widgets and panels and carousels and all kinds of different things that you use maybe for the first time on a sprint. And there's also the learning, who are your team members that estimate better? Who are the ones that maybe need a little bit more help? Who are the developers that seem to produce work faster and they're more rigorous about making sure it handles all the edge cases before it begins to get tested? Who are your developers that produce fast work maybe, but there's always going to be some people that are really good at cranking stuff out, but maybe they're not as detail oriented. I hate when people try to paint everyone into a bucket. We're humans, we're all different. Some developers are better at some things than others. Some testers are better at some things than others. In an ideal world, if you're doing continuous delivery or, lean product development, which I'm going to lead you over this channel to do, you're going to do more test-driven development where you write tests before you write the code. But that aside, if you do work for, let's say, 2 weeks in a sprint, and then you get to the end, not only is there work produced, because that's the thing the business wants, but the bigger thing for the engineering side of the business that's actually going to continually produce value is that the end of that 2 weeks, that sprint, is a checkpoint where the team can figure out, how good did we do? Where do we need to improve, right? And this is where the whole continuous improvement approach that came from the Toyota production system back in the 50s or 40s is applied to software development, right? So there's a thing called a sprint retrospective, and not all teams have these, but really what this is the team that delivered a sprint, as soon as they're done with it, they all get in a room and they talk about, what did we do well this sprint? What did we not do so well? And then they pick just a few, not all, but just a few areas that they can improve next sprint, and those become action items going forward. So the first thing I wanted to say is that I think Scrum is a really good process for a team that is using a lot of new practices to them. They're maybe doing technical documentation. Maybe they hired a technical writer that's going to document what their product does every sprint, and they've never done that before. Doing releases every 2 weeks forces them to have that checkpoint where they evaluate how well did we do as a group and stop their work and get together and reflect for a little bit. I think that's really a big benefit of Scrum if you choose to go that route. Now, let me talk about the downside of Scrum when trying to deliver lean. Remember when I talked about in the minimum viable product video that a product that's coming to market, whether it's a replatform or a redesign or a new product or just significant product development investment, if you're going to let your customer help you discover what the ideal product is and let go of your ego and not build your entire vision, go back and watch that video again if you need a refresher, then the way the team works needs to not look at change as a bad thing and something that the team's work process is penalized for, but rather change needs to be the norm and what the whole process is set up to embrace, okay? Well, if you're gonna do work for 2 weeks and then get feedback and start working again and get feedback in the middle of the next 2 weeks you're working, first of all, there's something that happens extremely common on Scrum teams, and that is that somebody figures out in the middle of the Scrum, let's say you have 4 developers who are on a Scrum team, and they are all supposed to get something done in the middle of that 2 weeks. Well, one of the folks may find that their work is going to take longer. And usually what happens is then the Scrum Master or the product owner or somebody who's kind of watching the efficiency of the team and helping lead everybody, they have to make a judgment call. Do we actually pull this functionality out for this sprint so that we can still get done at the end of the 2 weeks? Do we push the sprint out? So maybe it was planned to end in 2 weeks, but now we're really going to end in 3 weeks. Or do we push, sometimes what some teams will do, and this is what will lead you to why I think Kanban's superior, they'll go, oh, well, these two other folks finished earlier. Let's have them pick the next 2 features. So it's very common on a Scrum team, extremely common, that things are discovered in the middle of the Scrum that lead to the Scrum needing to be extended or the work that's being done in the middle of the Scrum needing to change. So if that's extremely common, what would be a way that we could optimize for that? Well, if you think about it, every time somebody's going to take too long or they finish early and they need to pick up new work, they get into a point where they're waiting. They're waiting for the product manager to decide, is this okay if I do this next thing? Or they're waiting for the team to say, hey, do you want us all to jump on the work of the person who's running behind and maybe help them to accelerate it? And they have to make all these kind of really quick, just-in-time decisions. On a really tight, small team, that's very agile and comfortable, they can get this done pretty quick. In a team that's very, coming from a waterfall approach, or they're still not really working lean, they're still working in we're going to predict everything, in the future, it can be very difficult because work ends up getting stuck in queues. Basically, each person becomes a queue, meaning if I have to get something out in 2 weeks, any person that becomes blocked potentially blocks now everyone's work because they're all supposed to be releasing at the end of the 2 weeks. So where Kanban becomes superior is Kanban is about, we're not going to release a new version of the software in a fixed cycle, meaning once a week or once every 2 weeks. We're going to release a new version of the software anytime any developer's task is found to be of sufficient quality to go to production. So if we have a team of 4 developers doing Kanban, one developer could get 5 things done in the same period that it takes one to get it done. And it doesn't matter. Whenever anybody gets something done and it's been tested and inspected and it has the appropriate quality and performance checks and approvals, boom, it goes out to production, whenever the heck that is. So there's a couple things about that people tend to get a little scared about when they think about Kanban. One is, well, what do I do when developer A is in the middle of working on his feature and it's not ready to go to production, and developer B finishes some work and he is ready to go to production? If those 2 developers are both checking into the code, and I don't want to get too geeky here, but when you do source control, in lieu of branching, which I'll get to in a moment, everybody needs to check their code into source control at the same time in a trunk or a master branch. Well, that master branch would have changes from developer A, who's in the middle of doing stuff and that's probably not ready to show to your customers. And developer B, he is ready to go. His work maybe has been tested, it's been found ready, and it is ready to go to production. So how do we prevent developer A's changes from preventing developer B's changes from being released in Kanban? Well, the way we do this is called feature hiding. And this is a concept that was documented in the book on continuous delivery, which I'll include a link below the video, from Jez Humble, who works at ThoughtWorks now. He's worked at a lot of different places. And feature hiding simply says, what a lot of companies will do in this situation is they'll have developer A will create a branch of the code. And immediately now his work's separate and he doesn't know what's going on with the main branch anymore. He's isolated from it, and it's up to him to remember, I need to daily, when I come in to do work, remember, oh, I've got to pull any changes in trunk into my branch and make sure I'm keeping kind of in sync. And in theory that tends to work pretty well, but it introduces lag time because you're not having people, you've heard of the term continuous integration. That really truly means continuously, all the time, Everybody's integrating all their changes. As soon as you start branching to allow a developer to do work, you're no longer doing continuous integration. You're doing feature branching. And I don't want to get too crazy on this, man. You can watch so many other videos on feature branching and all this. But feature hiding, what it means is if I'm about to introduce a change to the product or build something new, I'm going to put a configuration setting. And what do I mean by that? It might be a value in an XML file that can be set to true or false. It might be, if we're doing Node.js, maybe a JSON configuration file or a YAML, yet another markup language configuration file, where I have a value that can be set to true or false or on or off. And what we do is we have some code that says, if this configuration setting is set to off, don't show what I'm working on. Basically, hide developer A's changes. If this configuration setting is set to on, then show the changes. And what this does is now developer A can make his changes, and on his computer and in the environments where he's inspecting and testing his changes, he can set that configuration change to on, and he can see his work. And he can see his changes, and he can work on them and test on them and be have them under development, not ready to go. And if the code's ready to ship, hey, developer B's done, his feature's ready. Just make sure when you deliver that build or that copy of the code to production, have that configuration setting for developer A be set to false or off, and his changes, this is the funny thing, his changes are in production. They're there, but nobody can get to the changes. Okay? A lot of companies that are coming from waterfall development or enterprise development, where they may have read some, Microsoft guidelines from 10 years ago on how to do branching, they'll be like, no. We need to have a branch for each developer. We need to have a release branch, so we can do hot fixes. In a lean software development environment where you're releasing changes daily or weekly, basically as soon as they're done, and especially in Kanban, there is no need for that, because the goal of the team at that point, and this is a principle of continuous delivery, is keeping the code in an always releasable state. And I think when people first hear that, they think, well, I've worked on projects for years. Developers make mistakes. How could we ever keep the code every day in a releasable state? The way you do it is through feature hiding. People who are working on stuff, if you can you can release to production anytime. It's just going to be hidden. It's not ready to go until it's went through the appropriate approvals and testing, and it's ready to ship. And then the way it ships is not just pushing the code out, it's flipping that configuration setting. So I'll get into in some future videos, how do you do this? There's a million different ways that you can use configuration management to prevent changes from going into production. But here's the main thing I just want to get across today. Whether you're doing Scrum or Kanban, well, this isn't the main thing, this is another thing I want to touch on. Whether you're doing Scrum or Kanban, there's a lot of startups where, or a lot of teams that are fresh to a product, where they first read about Agile, or they read about Kanban, or they read about Scrum, and they read about user stories. And one of the things people talk about in a user story is that a user story doesn't have to be like a full spec, like every single requirement. It's really a statement that follows a template format. As a role, I need capability so that business value or outcome. As an administrator, I need to be able to edit users so I can change their details, or so I can respond to, ticket requests, whatever that ends up being. Well, a lot of teams that are kind of doing what I'd call cowboy coding is they put something like that, and that's all they've got, into a sprint or onto a Kanban board, and they just get started on it, and immediately they need to know, shoot, what's my validation? What happens when two administrators try to edit the same user at the same time? What do I do when I handle deletion? What does it need to look at? All this stuff. Well, if you're doing Scrum, not Kanban, and you've already estimated how long it can take, and you haven't had all those conversations, you're crazy. Because you're never going to hit your estimates, because it's inevitable that as soon as the developer who was assigned that user story starts to get clarification on the work, it's going to increase the scope and the estimate is going to be wrong. So the only time I would ever assign a developer to begin work on a user story, and that's all they have is the user story, is if you're doing Kanban and it's okay that there's not an expectation that the team's all gonna, marching in order be done at the end of the 2 weeks at the exact same time. Someone can take as long as it takes to get all the answers to their questions and have a really solid feature or change that they're working on that's been thought through properly and release it, and it won't stop or block anyone else. If you're going to continue to do Scrum, I'm of the opinion that before a developer begins work on something, we need as a team to ask everybody who's involved to apply the same rigor to that user story that you would back in the waterfall days. And people hate to hear this, but I'm sorry, after 20 years and all I can give you is my experience, it's true. If you're going to start on a user story in a Scrum and you're going to estimate it and be held to that estimate, I have to tell you, you need to make sure you think through, first of all, what's the acceptance criteria? Meaning, if you were to say, I'm done with this task, how would you demonstrate that you're done to the business? Acceptance criteria is not the user can go in and edit a user, or the administrator can edit a user. That's acceptable. No, it needs to be like log in as, username jamie.edwards and with your password. Click the link to go to the edit screen. Locate the user named, John Doe. Click edit. Change the, username to this, change the password to this, click save. When you're done saving, you should get this exact message. Now that sounds like, oh my gosh, this is use cases all over again. It kind of is. It's a script for how you're going to demonstrate to the business, I've finished my work. So the nice thing about acceptance criteria is it gives you a couple different things. One is it tells you exactly if I'm going to write automated tests or unfortunately have manual testers, what's the test plan for my feature? How exactly is it going to be tested? That's all captured. The other thing is it gives the business an expectation. This is what the software is going to do. Nothing outside of this list of exactly we're going to do this, we're going to do this, we're going to do this is going to be handled. So if there's anything from the business that they're expecting, well, I also think if I edit the user and this other thing needs to happen, that has to be in the acceptance criteria. Okay? The third thing is it gives you as a developer or the team a script that they can use to demo when they're done. So if they need to demo it to a customer or demo it to the business or demo it to a product manager, awesome. You've got acceptance criteria. You're good to go. Okay, the other thing though is if you're going to do Scrum or Kanban and you're going to do these short release cycles, also, you've heard of DevOps, and the DevOps movement, I won't rehash it all, but it's basically taking people that do operations work and people that do development work, and not having them report to a different manager, having them be part of a single Scrum team or sprint team or product team, and they work together. They're in the same daily stand-ups. They don't have like the ops meeting and the dev meeting that's a sprint. They're together. They work together. Well, that's called cross-functional teamwork. And in a lean team, which is what I'm trying to teach you on this channel, cross-functional teamwork isn't just dev and ops. It's also if you have user experience or UCX people that are doing, how are people going to use the product? What's the marketing experience? What's the support experience? What's the experience from the user as they use the product? They need to be part of Scrums, and they are going to have work that they're doing on the team. So is probably support. So you've got this cross-functional team. It's not just developers, testers, product owners. It's everybody that's part of developing that product. It's part of a Scrum, and I'll let you read videos or watch videos on Scrum if you want to know what's in a daily stand-up and whether you need to do that. But the main thing is everything that needs to be decided about how that feature is going to be designed, it's going to be tested, it's going to have user interface assets created for it, it's going to need infrastructure changes so that operations can roll it out to production. everything about that feature from the moment you start on it till it's in production and needs to be supported by users. You need to think of all of that if you're going to hit your estimate. So the only way you're going to do that, if you're thinking, wow, that's overwhelming, you're right, because you need to do a super small change. I mean, I would even say a team of 2 to 4 people, if you're going to create an edit screen that lets you edit users, and those users have 15 fields and they've got friends and all this stuff, you're not going to pull that off in 2 weeks. You're only going to pull off a little bit of that if you need to test it, release it to production, have infrastructure changes ready to go, have it approved by people, all this other stuff. Now, having a deployment pipeline in place, which is the thing that you build in continuous delivery that allows a team to basically kick off a script or press a button and it does everything to get that release to production. And I'm simplifying it. I'll go into way more detail. I'm really into continuous delivery, and I have been for the last 5 or 6 years. If you're going to do these fast releases and you want to cut down on chatter and release time, you absolutely have to build a deployment pipeline. I'll leave that for a future video. But the main things I wanted to get across were, I believe Kanban is superior to Scrum because it takes away the paranoia of we got to have everybody lined up on an exact date. And it lets people basically take work off the queue and just get started on it right away as soon as they're ready. And it lets people push changes out to customers and immediately start getting feedback without blocking anybody if people know how to do feature hiding, right? The other thing to keep in mind, though, and this is one of the things people get concerned about with Scrum and using Kanban over Scrum, is Scrum, the idea is, a lot of what people do is sprint planning. They'll take, well, my team can get this many story points done a Scrum. This is what I'm, predicting. And so they'll load up, they'll have their product backlog with like 40 features. They'll take these top, 5 and put them in Scrum 1, and these next 5 and put them in Scrum 2, and these next 5 and put them in Scrum 3, and try to go, well, we'll be done with 6 Scrums and we'll release, 8 months from now on this date. If you're going to do that, if you're going to do that, I would say do waterfall. Scrum's buying you, the only thing Scrum's going to buy you is that 2-week checkpoint to see how well your team's, how efficient they are. It's not helping you be more agile. Because remember, when I talked about yesterday in the estimation video, a backlog's not a list from top to beginning. Or top to bottom. It's a queue that can be reshuffled at any time. Well, if you do sprint planning and you go, here's what we're going to do exactly for the next 6 months, we're just going to do little bits every 2 weeks and we're not going to change the order of things, then you're never going to, the moment you start shuffling that backlog, all the sprints move around and everything needs to be recalculated. And I would say if you are going to try to pull that off, I can recommend, I've used it on a side business, there's a product called Pivotal Tracker that is really good at re-estimating end dates in the future of your sprints and things like that as you shuffle stuff around. That's probably the best product I've found as far as it's simple to use, it buys you a lot of value, it's very flexible. I don't typically do product endorsements. I'm not saying that's the only tool you could use, but I have used it and it does work well. I'd suggest you consider it. But if you're going to truly respond to customer feedback, and they're going to tell you, like I said in the MVP video, they're going to tell you things that you never thought that you even needed to build, and those are going to now become go on the top of your backlog and shift stuff around. Well, then who cares whether you get done every 2 weeks with the exact work you expected to do? You're going to spend so much time when you finish one Scrum going, whoa, the world changed when we got feedback. I guess we need to plan for like 2 or 3 weeks to get everything all back in shape and get the right requirements. And remember, if you're going to follow the process rigor I recommended, where you need to get infrastructure changes, requirements, documentation, how you're going to test it, all the stuff before you start work on it. Well, if you get feedback from a customer, now if you're going to take immediate action on it, the Scrum can't start, the new sprint can't start until all that estimation and all that work is done. That's stupid, in my opinion. Just do Kanban. Just let people work on whatever's on top of the list as soon as it's ready. And if a major piece of feedback comes back to the team and it means that people have to do different work going forward, have the developers pick up whatever's the next thing on the list. And that thing may be, we didn't do as well of a job at testing in our last release, so we're going to beef up testing. Or that thing might be, I need to help the ops team with some infrastructure automation using, let's say, PowerShell or Bash or Ansible or, Chef or something like that, or Azure, release management tasks. Whatever your technology is for automating releases and automating infrastructure, maybe that sprint, or not sprint, maybe that next task in Kanban that the person picks up has nothing to do with features, because the team needs a little bit more time to do the upfront planning work to get that next task that's based on feedback from the customer ready to go. So I think you can see hopefully where this is going. If you do Kanban and you do lean software development, everything's extremely fluid and there's stuff changing all the time. And it's not a bad thing, because you're not committing way out in the future when stuff will be done. You're only committing, my developers are always going to be working on the most important thing. The way that we've structured work to flow through the system optimizes for change. It's optimized for adaptability, meaning, remember how I talked about in that earlier video, when you do lean software development, you're trading flexibility and adaptability, something you want, something that you need to respond to how crazy this market has become, where you need to adapt to change. You're trading, you get that, but you need to give up predictability and have way less long-term predictability if you're going to meet the needs of your customer and truly respond to their feedback. And in my personal opinion is, at least today, Kanban type of approaches of work are more adaptable, and they're better for allowing the team to constantly be working on whatever's most valuable without wasting time with a bunch of realignment activity and people waiting on each other and stuff being stuck in queues where people are like, well, I can't get started because this other work I'm dependent on isn't ready and now I don't have anything to do. The last thing I'll say, hopefully this isn't too long, I'm trying to go shorter than yesterday, that was almost an hour. The last thing I'll say, though, is one challenge a team will have with doing Kanban that they won't have so much with Scrum is, in Scrum, you always hopefully have that sprint retrospective. So at the end of a sprint, the team gets together, they look at how they're doing process-wise, and they get a chance to reflect and make improvements. In Kanban, it can quickly get to a point where people are just so busy cranking out features, getting tasks done, helping each other. I mean, which is awesome, right? That's what we all live for. We want to be adding value. We want to be getting stuff done. People can be so busy, though, that it's a little harder to kind of spread best practices or help each other learn. You know what? Over the last 2 tasks I've done, I've realized there's this thing I wasn't doing maybe in the requirements that I've now started doing. You should start doing it too. So I would recommend that teams that do Kanban, even if you're not going to have a sprint that you're releasing, you still have a frequently scheduled retrospective, and whatever you want to call it. I mean, you don't have to call it a retrospective. It could just be a best practices meeting or a delivery process quality improvement sync up. I mean, you guys are all creative. You'll come up with a good name, but have a structured, planned, frequent, periodic period in which everybody gets together as a team, and don't just invite the developers, everybody who delivers that product, get them together. It doesn't have to be a big time wasting thing. It doesn't have to have a ton of outcomes. You don't need to measure and make sure we have our 3 action items. Just let it be free flowing. Let people just be people and just talk about it. Take some really good notes and then maybe vote at the end. Hey, here's our list on the blackboard or the whiteboard, or if we're doing Slack, here's a bullet list in Slack of the things we talked about that we want to change. Let's vote on the ones that are most important. I mean, you can find, Poll Daddy or a bunch of free sites out there for doing polls if you need to. And then just pick one of those or pick a few of those and, get started. I mean, the thing that stops teams from doing a good job and makes teams frustrating to work on is never because there's like one person that really doesn't do a good job. It's usually because everybody's depending on each other too much to work the exact same way. And we don't. We're humans. I have a certain thing, a set of skills I'm really good at that somebody else may not be as interested in, and maybe they don't have an appreciation for how valuable it is. Does it make sense for me to try to change that person? I can help them, I can mentor them, but it may just be part of their nature. You know what, I don't really, I care about it, I'm trying to do it, but it doesn't get me going to be super rigorous about my acceptance criteria. Maybe Jamie, you're a little more detail oriented and you care more about documenting stuff. So when I get a new task, I'm going to go to you to help with acceptance criteria. Great. Maybe someone else is awesome at automating infrastructure. They're like a total guru with Linux, and they're a guru with OS X, and they're a guru with Azure and Amazon Web Services. And maybe they're ops, maybe they're a developer. Who cares what their title is? But they love to do it. Let them do what they love. This is what Kanban and lean software development is about. It's about letting people do what they do best, getting chances for the team to improve, letting people be different if they want to, and just using the team to its most effective capabilities to get work done. So hopefully that was helpful. I will talk some more about Kanban in the future because, I hope I didn't give you an impression in this video that I think everybody needs to do Kanban. I don't. And I don't think everybody has the patience and the understanding of the market and of software to do lean software development. Some people just, they're too scared, I'll be honest, to let the customer drive their product too much. They can't give up that control. If you're someone who can give up that control and you want to deliver fantastic products that are so far beyond your competition and exceed the expectations of your business and your customer by amazing amounts and drive profitability and revenue that's way beyond what your customer or what your company has ever achieved, and you're willing to go on this journey, then I would say dive into Kanban. Dive into DevOps and continuous delivery and all these things. Learn these things, embrace them, and don't embrace them from a standpoint of we need to make sure that we check off we've done DevOps or we've done continuous delivery, if we've done Kanban. No, embrace it as a form of, are we embracing the uncertainty in the market and using practices that are going to help us get there quicker? As long as everything you're doing is cutting down time wasted in queues, it's reducing anxiety, it's making people love what they do more and feel like they're not stuck less and spending and doing busy work less, and the company's business outcomes that they're measuring the product on, meaning like profitability goals, satisfaction ratings, operational efficiency, whatever you're measuring, as long as you're getting closer to that, then I don't care, whether a new process comes out tomorrow that's, Scrum or Kanban or Fall or Sprint or, whatever the heck you want to call it. And they're going to come out, right? Look at every one of those processes as in the lens of, now that I know that estimates are pretty horrible, people are very different, customers are going to change what we want to build, technologies change week to week that might make our work irrelevant. We live in this highly uncertain market. I want to evaluate technologies and processes now from the lens of, is it enabling us to adapt to uncertainty better? And I think if you always look at what you do within that lens, you're always going to do the best work and really respond the best in your market. So thanks for watching. And please, if you liked the video, give me a thumbs up, subscribe, and I'll talk to you tomorrow.